Hi there, welcome to iTWire TV. For many of us, the way we work is different to how people approach their career development a few years back. The initial COVID lockdowns and then the mass transition to working from home has provided the perfect environment for people to upskill, reskill, or transform their career and skills. Micro-credentials continue to gain more prominence as people recognise their value. So to discuss the essential skilling of staff and how Australian companies are leveraging micro-credentials, we have our guest today, Tony Maguire, ANZ Regional Director for Global Learning Company, D2L. Thank you, Tony. How are you today?
Great. It's a wonderful day to be talking about micro-credentials. There's been so much commentary in the media and certainly on the back of the Jobs and Skills Summit last week. It's really, really timely. So thanks for having me.
No, thank you. I guess before we talk about micro-credentials, can you tell me who is D2L?
D2L's an education technology company. It's been around for about 20 years out of Canada. Toronto is our home base, our office in Kitchener. Here in Australia, we have a bricks and mortar office in Melbourne. We've been here for about 12 years. We have onshore support, tier one development, customer support, all of our marketing functions out of this region for Australia and New Zealand. And we work with universities, schools, government organisations, TAFE, any learning organisation who needs to humanise their learning, uses platforms such as Brightspace, which is our learning management innovation platform, to deliver content and deliver a learning experience.
Okay, oh, fantastic. Wow, so definitely well established, well entrenched.
Yeah.
I guess, Tony, so what are micro-credentials? Let's start with that.
I'll tell you a little story of some wine we had the other night. We had a group of folks in a hotel in Melbourne, and the focus was around micro-credentials. So we had probably 100 people register. We had about 40 physically in the room who were in Melbourne. We had others remotely in Sydney. And we had Engineers Australia there, so we had industry, big association group. We had TAFE Queensland, who are one of the largest providers of credentials in Australia. We had Deakin University, who did a lot of the spade work in terms of talking about micro-credentials. And we came to the conclusion after an hour's conversation that whilst there's lots of descriptors around micro-credentials, there is no tight definition as such. So if we think about the Australian definition, it's very much influenced by vocational education and training sector and higher education. So it talks around the Australian Quality Framework, volume of learning, those sorts of things.
Yes.
If we think about the New Zealand definition of micro-credentials, that's talking about a coherent set of skills. It talks about it being time-bounded, but it talks about it being owned by industry, employers, and the community. Go to the EU and it's different again. So I would suggest to you, there's a couple of foundational concepts around micro-credentials. I think of it, and this is my primary school teacher in me coming out, I think of it as a Lego approach for learning.
Okay.
Right? Why do I say that? Because the idea is that micro-credentials are smaller, short course or shorter learning activities that give you a valued outcome. There's evidence around it. You can demonstrate that evidence to employers, potential employers. It helps you build a narrative of your own learning journey, but it has to have some value for all the stakeholders, employers, employees, but it also needs to be a model of reward and recognition as well. You don't do the learning just because you want to do it. There's going to be an outcome to it. Now, this is essentially an underpinning in the way that we think about new skills in the future of work.
Okay. Right. No, very interesting. Okay, so then I guess what are the benefits of micro-credentials to employees and the employer? Why pursue a micro-credential?
Yes, that's a really good question. So the Foundation for Young Australia did a lot of work about 5 years ago around what learning and the lot of young Australians kind of meant. What was that marriage between the two? And there was a lot of thinking done around the attitudes of young Australians about disengagement, lack of understanding about what the future of work would look like. Roll into that many of the changes that are occurring in terms of automation, hybrid work, and also the need for us to think about how we bring marginalised older Australians back into the workforce. Traditional, longer form types of learning weren't really appropriate for all of those different use cases. So micro-credentials give employees the ability to change their pathway more, I guess, elegantly, simply, and cheaply, because they're smaller packaged pieces of learning. There's an evidence piece there that they can share with a potential employer or share within their learning organisation or their business that will help them on their career path. Employers, if properly mapped across all of the organisation, they can see where the gaps are, who's progressing well, what the performance targets can look like if we make this tweak to changing here. If we're moving into a new product area or a new stream of business, what are the things we need to be able to do to train the workforce so that we can move into that? I think stepping back a level, when we consider the amount of data that, say, TAFE Queensland gets from the scale, the anonymised data they get from hundreds of thousands of micro-credentials being consumed, you start to get a sense of data that can inform policy. So it actually really works all the way through the economy.
Right, wow. No, that is interesting. And if you embark on the path of micro-credentials, is that, I guess, I mean, earlier you gave the example of Lego bricks. I mean, are these something that can then lead to other certifications or educational pathways? Can you leverage them for, more advanced learning?
David, that's a really interesting area at the moment. So yes, the answer is yes.
Welcome.
Currently, we've got a lot of flexibility with universities who have the ability to self-accredit. TAFE can't self-accredit because they have a very tight mandate through training packages, so skills are very tightly described. What I'm seeing, having just met with, over the last 4 months, probably 30, 40 CEOs, vice chancellors from universities, and TAFE directors earlier this week, was a willingness to collaborate in a way I haven't seen before. So with TAFE and university, for instance, working together, they can leverage the flexibility of universities and the delivery and content creation, learning architecture structures that are so strong within TAFE, bring those together to quickly bring credentials forward. Both of those parties are interested in seeing how they can better weave micro-credentials into the longer and more formalised recognition of skills. So for Queensland TAFE, for instance, they think about stackable, so building micro-credentials vertically.
Yes.
But they also think about them as being packable sideways.
Okay. Right.
And that then needs to articulate through the broader learning experience and journey of learners. And I think it's probably worthwhile thinking about two other things here. Underpinning this is really a reset. And if we thought about what Don Dewar during Universities Australia said with Jason Clare, the Minister for Education, they talked about a reset. There's a dialogue happening. We saw it last week in the Skills Summit, and I certainly saw it this week with the TAFE directors. There is a reset happening. There is a collaboration and a discussion which we haven't seen for a while. Industry, Chamber of Commerce, all of these parties are coming to the table. The benefit now is that the underlying concept that's relied upon to build micro-credentials is one of co-creation. You must have all parties to the table: industry, you must have employers, you must have the education providers themselves, and you have to have buy-in from the people who are going to buy it in the end. Because at the end of the day, a micro-credential is a product that has to be sold. So there has to be a value proposition here. So unless you can have that co-creation structure in place, micro-credentials won't work, because it won't work for industry, it won't work within the careers, employees won't buy it. So if it doesn't say what it says on the tin, it's not going to work. So this co-creation is absolutely fundamental. And I'm seeing a sense of optimism and collaboration that I haven't seen for probably 10, 15 years in the sector.
Right.
I think the other thing that's important to think about is the way in which we build micro-credentials has to be fast,
Yes.
and it has to be at scale. Micro-credentials don't work in the 1s and 2s and 3s. It works in the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. I'll give you an example of this. At the beginning of the pandemic in Queensland, there was a dire need for training for hospitality and personal care workers in COVID-safe practices. The switch had flicked and everybody's now working remotely. We're shutting things down, but we need to be training everybody so that they're safe when they come back. So Queensland TAFE built a set of micro-credentials for that sector, and we helped them scale up the back-end platform for this because the platform component is really important. We scaled that up and they started delivering those in 2 weeks.
Right.
Now, here we are. It was a massive endeavor, but here we are now 2 years later, over 300,000 people have been through those micro-credentials. Now, the ability to scale it up in 2 weeks and then just bang these things out is so important. Scale and speed is critical.
Yeah, right. Wow. Oh, that's very interesting. And presumably, I mean, putting so many people through that's incredible. Presumably these are formally recorded. Like, let's say, for example, I've got a micro-credential and I apply for a job and I list that in my resume and they want proof of that. Can these micro-credentials be verified?
Yes. In fact, in the Queensland example, I'll put that pen down. In the Queensland example, it was very much the case because you had to have that COVID safe award badge, if you like, to go back into the workplace. I think there's probably a misconception a lot of people have. They think a micro-credential is a badge.
Yes.
A driver's license is a certificate. It's a badge, if you like, but there are underlying skills that we assume everybody's got. So that's essentially the same thing. A micro-credential is a warrant. It's a trusted, evidence-based assessment that you have mastery of certain capacities, capabilities, attitudes, skills, and it's done in a way which is trusted by everybody. So the trust is the other piece. I talked about co-creation. Trust is absolutely critical as well. If all parties don't trust the credential, then it's not going to be of any use to anybody.
Sure. Gotcha. Okay. Wow. And I mean, this has all been fascinating, but I guess another thing that comes to mind is, can micro-credentials be able to help break down barriers to education and learning to those who might be differently abled or have accessibility issues? Can that benefit people?
David, I'm wondering if you're actually at one of the meetings that I was at, because these were some of the things that were raised. So maybe maybe you had a fly on the wall there that was wired up. So it's a really, really important question. The answer is yes.
Okay, excellent.
So for any Australian who is coming from a disadvantaged circumstance, whether it's socioeconomic, or whether it's low vision Australians, whatever, micro-credentials must provide an equitable access for any Australian to a certificate. And once you achieve that certificate, it should be irrelevant in terms of your circumstance about the value of that and your capability to perform that skill. The question is, how do we ensure that micro-credentials are designed in a way that all Australians can access them? So we do a lot of work with our partners, for instance, like Vision Australia,
yes.
Deaf Children Australia. We work with internationally with Irish Deaf Society. We do a tremendous amount of work in ensuring that the accessibility for any learner is as open and as easy as it can be within the platform. And one of our accessibility team leads in Kitchener is herself a low vision D2L, but she brings a tremendous amount of lived experience. Now, I talked about co-creation before.
Yes.
When you're thinking about the way the platform supports accessibility, you must have lived experience informing the way that you deliver.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I got it. And what about then career transitions and progressions? So can help people in those circumstances as well, I take it.
It does, yeah. If you're thinking about micro-credentials as milestones or as descriptors of your growing competency, over your lifelong journey, micro-credentials and the more formal learning that you should be able to be woven into a solid narrative. You, as an employee, as a learner, should be able to explain and use your growth, your journey, as a way to explain your value to a new employer. Employers should be able to look at your learning journey and see the value that you would potentially bring.
Okay.
One of the challenges we have at the moment is none of that is recorded when people put their resumes forward. So there's a lot of work being done in the back end with, again, Queensland TAFE. When we think about scale, we need to make micro-credentials machine readable.
Yes.
Now that's the next really interesting technical challenge, I think. Now, once you've got that in place, being able to tell your story, have systems recognize your journey, and then be able to plug you into and make offerings to, or provide you with options for other learning, is really, really interesting.
Okay, that is interesting. Yeah, right. So I'm sold. I'm sold on on micro credentials. So I guess then, what's an effective micro credentialing approach or strategy for people or for companies? I guess how do we go about this now?
So I've just got some notes over here. I actually did a little session yesterday where we were working with a whole group of associations, and we were talking about a credible approach to how you would implement a micro-credentials program. And I see that there's four stages, really. You want to be able to audit what's happening within the business already, and that audit requires that stakeholder engagement. You need to be able to go out and gather requirements, understand the lived experience, and reflect that back in what you then start to, stage 2, build and model. So you want to then model some of those learnings in smaller learning activities and start experimenting with micro-credentials. You're going to get it wrong, you're going to get it right. The learnings that you take from what you fail in will be much more valuable than the learnings from the easy, quick wins.
Yes.
And once you've got some models in place, you then want to be able to embed that in your broader practice. So then you've already got a good platform in place, a good innovation learning platform that covers the badging, has the data in place, can deliver learning in different ways based on the accessibility needs of all those different kinds of stakeholders. You need to then embed that good policy, grow it, good practice, grow it, expand it, prune what's not working, fertilize what is. And then the next phase is once you've got a program up and going, you can then start to sustain that and grow parallel pieces around that. So really a 4-stage process. And in fact, I've probably got a link to that session somewhere.
Sure. Excellent. So, I mean, you've talked about scale and all these amazing things. I guess what is the tech behind micro-credentials? How do you make this happen? If I could ask.
That's look, it is happening.
Yep.
I think there are some really exciting examples in the field. So if you think about what Queensland TAFE, and I go back to TAFE because they are such a front runner here.
Yes.
They are building, releasing micro-credentials at a dizzying rate, but they're not doing it in a way which is kind of devil may care. We'll just throw stuff out and see what happens. They're being very targeted. So they're releasing their micro-credentials specifically in areas based on that research from the Foundation for Young Australians. They're now releasing these micro-credentials in partnership with industry. So they'll do some work in decarbonisation. They're releasing a whole set of really interesting future-looking micro-credentials with BHP Mitsubishi Australia.
Right.
Really, really exciting project. They do work around autonomous driving and drones. Right? Flip that around then for Engineers Australia, and they have, I don't know, 30, 40,000 professionals in Australia.
Yes.
They're looking at how they build a micro-credentials program based on the immediate skills over the next 2 to 3 years that are going to be required by engineers in Australia. Now, a lot of that is in rail. So digital signalling. So they're flipping to see what are those smaller pieces and micro focuses almost that are critical to building big infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, 5 years ago, Engineers Australia just wanted to curate their own content, but now they're actively going out to find people to work with to build it again, co-creation.
Yes. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Well, that's awesome. That's been great, Tony. So I guess if people are listening, what can they do to find out more and to get in touch with D2L?
So we, as I said, we work with any group who's interested in developing micro-credentials. If there's further information they want, or they want connections to any of the clients that we have, any of the thought leadership work that we do, you'd be most welcome. Just go to the website. And there's a ton of case studies and examples there, but also a personal appeal to anybody. Catch me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to cover off any questions. But beyond that, the platforms that we provide and the expertise that we bring in terms of building at scale, delivering at speed, and providing the data that any learning organisation needs is fundamental to what we do. So a conversation around platforms, accessibility, that's core to our interests as well. Yeah,
wonderful. Oh, that's been fantastic, Tony. No, that's awesome. I'll connect with you on LinkedIn and check out your website myself. Yeah, start on
anytime.
Wonderful. No, thank you, Tony. I've really enjoyed that. So that's been Tony Maguire, ANZ Regional Director, D2L. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. I've been in my happy place.
Excellent.